Hi everybody, my name is Jacques. I'm one of the third year medical students here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to use Anki and Clerkship. And I'm going to start this video by asking that you watch at 2x speed, as I don't speak very quickly. I'm going to also give a heads up that this video is not going to cover the basics of how to use Anki. I covered that in my previous video and playlist, which I'll include in the description down below. It's important that you know the basics of how to use Anki before using it in Clerkship, especially that you have the right interval settings so that your workload's manageable. I'd like to give a quick thank you to Mark and James for helping me create and review this presentation. So, as a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to first cover why you should use Anki and Clerkship. I'll then talk about how you can download the AnKing deck, which is going to be your main resource for using Anki and Clerkship. Then I'll show you how you can search the AnKing deck using the tags, and this will be super useful because then you can search the tags on specific topics that you're deficient in to create decks to cover those topics. And you can also use those tags to find cards that complement individual UWorld questions, which is a really neat feature that I think you'll all really like. I'll also show how you can use the tags to gather really high yield NBME specific Anki cards, which are contained within the AnKing deck. As well, I'll briefly touch on how you can use Anki to help remember clinical teaching points and clinical pearls that you learn throughout the way during your clerkship. And I will also cover how you can use the Clerkship Anki decks that Mark, James, and I have shared. So why should you use Anki and Clerkship? Well, I think you should use Anki and Clerkship because it's objectively the most efficient way to study. And I've covered the reasons as to why that is in my previous video. But the point is that if you're studying more efficiently, it should afford you more time to enjoy your life, which I think we're all in favor for. I know myself personally, I feel like I had a lot more free time in Clerkship thanks to using Anki, as I rarely ever had to study beyond doing my Anki flashcards, which usually took me less than 30 minutes or an hour a day that I would do in my downtime when there were lulls at the hospital. Also, by keeping up with all the pre-clerkship material, it really allows you to hit the ground running on every rotation that you do, which I think reflects really well on you and can result in really great evaluations from your preceptors. And as an added bonus, keeping up with all that material allows you to get really good exam scores at the end of each rotation. It also gives a really huge advantage by never forgetting the clinical pearls you pick up as you go through your clerkship. I think memorizing all of those and keeping them throughout your career is ultimately going to help you become the best doctor that you can be. Another added benefit is that in clerkship you're going to encounter the NBME exams, which are notoriously difficult exams that love to test on really obscure medical minutiae and buzzwords that if you've memorized those little tidbits and buzzwords beforehand, it makes the exams a lot easier to pass. Now, before we get into the technical details of how to use Anki and Clerkship, I want to quickly say that the ultimate best way to go about this is to keep up with all your pre-clerkship foundations cards. And now I know not all of you are going to do that, and don't be discouraged. Keep watching this video. I think Anki can still be really useful to you, but I want to give a quick word of encouragement to those that have been keeping up with their pre-clerkship cards to keep doing so, because I think it's extremely valuable to keep up with those cards. They really provide an excellent knowledge base for every rotation, and the workload just gets easier as the cards get more and more spread out and as you suspend the stuff that's not clinically relevant. And you do start really developing a good sense of what is clinically relevant and what is not. And that allows you to then focus your time solely on adding in cards to your decks that fill knowledge gaps that the decks didn't cover. And the ultimate goal of this is hopefully to create a comprehensive medicine deck for yourself and a knowledge bank that you can really rely on and build upon for the rest of your career. But now I'll talk about how we actually go about doing that. Now the first step to this is going to be to download the AnKing deck, and there's two ways to go about that. The first is to go download the most recent deck release on Reddit, and I'm going to include the link down below to where you can find that. The link I included is to version 11. That's the most recent release at the time of making this video, other than Anki Hub. But by the time you watch this, maybe there's another release that's been done. Now you're going to want to download the link from the top commenter in that Reddit thread, as that's going to be the link that actually has all the media and images attached. The AnKing can't post it with all the media due to copyright issues. Now the second way to go about downloading the AnKing deck is to set up Anki Hub and pay the subscription so you can have the most recent version of the AnKing deck with automatic updates, with new cards being added, corrections being made. This option is really awesome. The only thing is it's maybe a little more technically challenging to set up, and it costs maybe $7 Canadian a month. I'm not going to go into the details of how to set that up, but I will link in the description down below the AnKing video that tells you how to set it up. Now, for those that don't know, the AnKing deck is this really huge, awesome compilation deck of the most frequently used high-quality medical Anki decks, like the Zonky Step deck, the Cheesy Dorian decks, the LOL Not a Cop decks, and a bunch of others, plus a bunch of cards that the AnKing team themselves added and collaborators on Reddit. And they took the time to remove a bunch of duplicate cards and organize all the cards by tags, which is super useful as it provides you this huge bank of really high quality cards that is easily searchable to retrieve cards on specific topics to fill in your learning gaps, and also to make really quick and easy high yield NBME Anki decks. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Now, one thing I need to note first before you download this deck is that if you're going to be importing the AnKing deck to the same profile that you have all the pre-Clerkship decks that Mark, James, and I made, importing the AnKing deck is going to update all the AnKing cards that we included in our pre-Clerkship decks. And that's not ideal, as we modified a lot of those AnKing cards to make them better or more accurate to our teaching, and to add in lecture notes in the extras and things like that. So to avoid losing all of that, what you're going to need to do is go into Tools, go to Special Fields, and click the Import Tag setting, and then click Save. This should prevent the cards we've modified from being changed. If you don't have the Special Fields add-on, you can follow the instructions up on the screen now. It's quite easy, and then just follow the screenshots as I've included. Another valuable thing to do would be to export your collection before you import the AnKing deck, just in case there's anything funny that goes on. Make sure you include scheduling information into your backup, and that's done just by clicking the gear icon next to your collection and clicking Export Deck. Now, the first thing you're going to do with the AnKing deck is suspend all the cards. So click the AnKing deck, then click Browse. And then to be safe, make sure you go in the sidebar and click just the AnKing deck so that the search bar says Deck AnKing, so you don't suspend all your Foundations cards, because that would really suck. Then click a card, click Control A or Command A, and then hit Toggle Suspend. If you don't have this button, you can right click and you'll have a suspend button as well. But that should suspend all the cards. When we back out of the deck here, you can see suspended cards, you have all the cards. So now the way you want to go about actually retrieving relevant cards from this AnKing deck is by, in the search bar, either typing in keywords for the topic you're interested in, like acute coronary syndrome. And as you can see, that brings up 88 cards relevant to acute coronary syndrome. Another useful way to search it, though, is by using the tags, which are these little things at the bottom of the cards here, which indicate what topic this card is relevant to and which educational videos it's relevant to. As you can see, this tag indicates it's relevant to the Boards and Beyond lecture on EKG basics. Now, the way you actually use these tags is you go to the search bar and you type in tag : and that brings up a new search bar where you're actually searching by the tags. And this allows you to find cards relevant on specific topics that have all been organized. So in this case, let's say we want to learn about acute coronary syndrome. We type that in. We see multiple different subtopics for acute coronary syndrome, and say you just actually want to focus on the different treatments for acute coronary syndromes. You can select this first tag, and that'll bring up 19 cards relevant to that. And you only have to sift through 19 cards now to find the ones that are relevant to you, instead of having to sort through the 88 that we were seeing previous. You can also combine tags by doing or searches or and searches. As you can see here, I combined two tags with an or search to find all the cards relevant to either tag. Now, another way that the tags are really, really useful is that there's been a lot of cards made for specific UWorld questions, and they've been tagged by the UWorld question ID. And so that means when you go through UWorld, if you get a question wrong, for example, we'll use this one. If you look in the top left corner, it has a question ID and then a number. if you copy that number, go back to your Anki, type in tag, and put in that number, it'll bring up cards made specifically for that UWorld question. And then you can unsuspend that card, review it, and that way you'll never forget the learning points from the UWorld questions you get wrong. And this is a really, really valuable way to fill in your learning gaps and maximize your learning with UWorld. I will warn that not every single question on UWorld has a card made for it, but a lot of them do, and it saves you a lot of time from having to make it yourself. Now, a third way that these tags are going to be really useful to you is that the AnKing team and many collaborators have tagged the cards to the rotations that they're relevant to. So if you go to the little sidebar over here, you go down to tags, you find the AK Step 2 V12 or V11 tag, whichever version you have, and go down to resources by rotation and expand that and select the rotation you're currently on. Now you'll notice if you click IM, it brings up like 5,000 cards. It's unmanageable. But if you expand that, you actually have subtags for different resources you can use to study for the internal shelf exam. In my opinion, the highest yield one is the Emma Holiday tag. She has a way of really capturing the medical minutia and buzzwords that they love to test. So you'll notice now if you click just the Emma Holiday tag, it only brings up 500 some cards, which is a lot more manageable. And I should add, if you've been keeping up with your pre-clerkship cards, a lot of the Emma Holiday cards may already be unsuspended and included in previous decks. And so that you don't have to sort through those again, what you can do is add to your search is:"suspended, and then it'll exclude all the unsuspended cards. Or you could also add deck:"AnKing, so it only includes cards still within the AnKing deck. That way you don't have to sort through cards that you've already sorted into high yield and low yield and spent the time suspending the things you don't need. That covers the basics on how to use the AnKing deck. I'm going to include a link in the description down below to a video that the AnKing made on how he likes to use his deck throughout the clerkship rotations. Now, another way that Anki can be super valuable to you during clerkship is to find or make cards that correspond to specific clinical pearls or teaching points that you pick up along the way. They may come from teaching sessions or cases you're involved with or one-on-one teaching with residents or preceptors. And the way that I usually approach this is on my rotations I'll carry around this little notebook, and whenever there's an interesting learning point, something I didn't know before, I'll write it in my notebook, and at the end of the day I'll go home and I'll try to find a card in the AnKing deck that matches that piece of knowledge. And if I can't find one, then I'll make a card. As an example, when I was on my family med rotation, there was a patient with a rib fracture and I wasn't quite sure how to approach this. After discussing with my preceptor, he let me know that analgesia and incentive spirometry are the two mainstays of treatment and the reasons as to why. And so I quickly made this card that you see up on the screen, and this way I'll never forget that teaching point. And usually when I make these cards, I try to check up to date first to confirm the accuracy of the teaching, but also to add extra details so I remember it in more context. And I'll also try to add some images from Google Images just to enhance my learning with visual memory cues. Mark, James, and I have been doing the same thing throughout Clerkship, and we've been sharing the cards that we make with each other. Right now we're in the process of compiling these cards together and uploading them to the Google Drive so that you can all use them as well if you wish. I will warn though that even though the decks are organized by rotation, they're nowhere near comprehensive. They were truly just made to address the learning gaps that we identified during our rotations. It's not really going to cover any of the stuff we covered in our pre-clerkship decks, and our learning gaps may be different than yours. But hopefully it saves you some time from having to make cards yourself on the same clinical teaching points. And our hope is that you can all make cards yourselves for teaching points you pick up and share them with your class. And hopefully we could eventually have a system so that each year of clerks can learn from the previous year of clerks and have that knowledge passed down. I also have to warn you guys about a technical issue that will pop up with these decks. So at times we made individual decks to cover specific topics using a mix of AnKing cards and our own cards we would create manually. For example, during surgery, I made a lot of decks to complement the webinar videos you have to watch during that rotation. And the issue is if you import those decks to the profile that you have the AnKing deck on, all the AnKing cards I included in my decks will be skipped or updated, and they won't actually be moved into those decks, and they won't be unsuspended. And this really sucks, as a lot of the work in making those decks is actually gathering the relevant AnKing cards and putting them in the appropriate deck. So for the purpose of you guys not having to redo all this work, we tagged all the cards in the decks by the deck name they have. I'll show you how this works. Now, the first thing you're going to have to do before you even import these decks is you're going to have to go to the Special Fields add-on and click Update Settings and checkmark the combined tags. This will just make it so they actually get the changes I made to some AnKing cards. And then you're going to go to, say, my biliary tract disease deck. We see there's only 5 cards in there. Those are just the ones I created manually. All the other cards are AnKing cards that we need to gather into this deck. So you're going to go to Browse, click Tag, colon, and type in surgery, colon, colon, surgery card Jacques made, colon, colon, biliary tract disease. Now it brings up all the cards that I wanted in this deck. You can click Control A, select all of them, change them into the appropriate deck, and unsuspend. Now I know this is a little tedious and you're going to have to repeat this process for all the other topic decks, but it should save you a lot of time compared to having to sift through all the AnKing cards yourself. For each rotation, I also tried to include a deck that contains all the random AnKing cards I unsuspended for random clinical teachings that weren't covered in our pre-clerkship decks. So if you want access to those, they're all tagged as well. Same system. You go to Browse, type in tag, colon, and put in surgery or whatever rotation you're looking for, colon, colon, miscellaneous unsuspended AnKing cards, and it should pull up all the cards. You can select them, change deck, unsuspend them. And I think that's it. That should be everything you need to know to use Anki and Clerkship effectively. I encourage you all to try out some of these things, and I also encourage you to try to keep up with your review cards every day. As I talked about in my previous video, that's how Anki works best. If you are doing that, please make sure you're using the right interval settings, as you want to keep your workload manageable. I'm going to put on the screen here the interval settings that I use and that I recommend. I'm also going to suggest to you guys to keep up with your cards from completed rotations as you go through every rotation, as there's significant overlap between the rotations. For example, what you learn on obstetrics is going to be relevant on family medicine and on your emergency medicine rotations, and vice versa. There's also a lot of overlap in the NBME exams. For example, the surgery and internal medicine and PEDS exams had significant overlap in their content. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment or shoot me a message on Facebook, or stop me in the hallways at the hospital or in clinic if you see me. I've included a picture here of me, Mark, and James so that you know our faces. Please feel welcome to come up to talk to any of us about any Anki related things or medical school related things. We genuinely love talking about this stuff, and we love helping people and teaching. We wish you the best of luck on your rotations, and we look forward to seeing you on the wards.